My name's Mark Brown. I'm a Gunditjmara man on my mother's side and a Bunurong man on my father's side. And today I'm here to welcome you to my father's country, beautiful Bunurong country. But before we do that, I'd like to pay respects and acknowledge all of my ancestors, my elders, and all of my community members, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge the continuous and unbroken connection to country for the Bunurong people. I'd also like to acknowledge and pay respects to all traditional owners, Aboriginal and Torres Strait, who work, rest, live or play on Bunurong country. Thank you for being here with us. But today on these sacred lands, we gather in the spirit of respect, unity, and reconciliation. This welcome is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to honour and respect the rich cultural heritage of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, whose community members and elders have generously looked after these lands for countless generations. My people have a deep spiritual connection to these lands, encompassing the rivers, the mountains, the coastal areas, and the bushlands that surround us today. Our language, our traditions, our culture, and everything that we are interwoven with the very fabrics of the lands that surround us. We have a deep connection to our lands and a strong cultural identity tied to our ancestral plains. Our traditions and our language are a reflection of the profound knowledge and ongoing wisdom and custodianships of our elders and our ancestors that passed these down to us, along with the knowledge of how to look after, maintain country, and our communities. Everything that they do and everything that they are is an inspiration for us all. We stand here today in acknowledgement and gratitude for all of our elders and community members who have generously looked after these lands for countless generations. Their resilience, their wisdom, their guidance, and their commitment to preserving and revitalising Bunurong country is an inspiration for us all. As we gather here, we recognise that this welcome is a part of our shared journey. It's a shared journey of reconciliation, and it's a shared journey of understanding. By acknowledging and encompassing the rich cultural heritage and traditions of the Bunurong people, we strive to foster mutual respect, cultural exchange, and a celebration of diversities. May this welcome to country deepen our appreciation for the wisdom of the Bunurong people and strengthen all of our connections to these ancient lands as we move forward together as a unit and a family. On behalf of all those present here today, I extend my heartfelt welcome. May our time together be filled with reverence, learning, and a renewed commitment to honouring and cherishing the Bunurong people, our culture and our heritage, but more importantly, the sacred lands on which we stand. Wamanjinka. Wamanjinka Balakiaka. Ngata Bunurong Balak Bikbik. Welcome. Welcome to beautiful Bunurong country. Walker with soft feet and an open heart. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Sue Hampel, co-president of the Melbourne Holocaust Museum and your MC. On behalf of my co-president, Mike Dubinsky, OAM, the Melbourne Holocaust Museum Board, Director Jane Josem, and our staff, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the 2023 Rosenkranz Oration. Can you please turn your phones to silent if you have them with you? Thank you, Mark, for your welcome to country. We also pay our respects to the elders, past and present, of the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nations. I would like to acknowledge the elders in our community, the Holocaust survivors, our founders, whose dedication and foresight are the inspiration behind our beautiful museum, which will be open to the public on Sunday. It's time, it's ready. Yes. So feel free to book online. It is just so wonderful to see so many survivors in attendance in the first and second row. In this museum, the largest institution in Australia, solely dedicated to Holocaust education, remembrance and research, we promise to amplify your voices and honour the commitment of Zachor, remember. I'd like to mention Terry and John O'Lazarus and members of the Rosenkranz family, our major supporters of this event. A special acknowledgement to Helen Mamoff, OAM, the chair of the Melbourne Holocaust Museum Foundation, and the trustees that are here tonight, to Vedran Drakulik, OAM, CEO of the Gandel Foundation. Thank you all. The words of our 6 former Prime Ministers and their support for Israel's right to defend itself tells us that Australia is a country that produces leaders of moral principle. On that note, I would like to welcome Dr. Michelle Anada-Raja, Member for Higgins. Thank you for coming tonight. We'll start this evening's proceedings by lighting a candle and observing 1 minute silence to honour those who were brutally murdered in Israel and to remember the hostages who have been kidnapped by Hamas. We stand in total solidarity with the people of Israel during this very challenging and difficult time. Could you please stand for 1 minute silence? Thank you. And a final welcome to our community leaders, rabbis, and all of you who have come tonight. The annual Rosenkranz Oration was created in 2008 in memory of Betty Rosenkranz and to honour the legacy of Shmuel Rosenkranz as the second president of the museum. An eyewitness to Kristallnacht, Shmuel came to Australia deeply committed to Holocaust remembrance and education. Thank you to the Goldman and Lazarus families for enabling us to continue with your grandfather's legacy. Your support assists us in bringing experts from around the world to Melbourne to share their knowledge with us. The events that took place on Kristallnacht 85 years ago marked a turning point in the history of the Holocaust, and we are deeply aware of the echoes and reverberations of history. As we look at the world today, where hate, discrimination and antisemitism abound, we must ask ourselves the question, have we learned anything from the past 85 years? I hope that you read today's Australian. You've probably all seen it over here, but if you haven't, I suggest you have a look. As A.B. Goldberg states, loudly, A.B., thank you, loudly and clearly on the front page, Australian survivors have done something they have never done before. Over 100 survivors made a collective statement written directly to the people of Australia, and here is just a little part of that statement. Never did we think that we could witness a reenactment of the senseless and virulent hatred of Jews that we faced in Europe. The actions of Hamas are so familiar, so barbaric, yet instead of condemning this, the response across the globe is a shameful spike in anti-Semitism. Our memories and our experience in ghettos, concentration camps in hiding, and seeing our families and communities vanish compel us to raise our voices and implore humanity to reject hatred, bigotry, and violence. We cannot allow history to repeat itself. In the face of adversity, we have learnt the importance of resilience, unity, and hope. We believe in the power of education and remembrance to prevent the atrocities of the past from occurring again. Together we can strive for a world where every individual, regardless of their faith, regardless of their cultural background, can live in peace and security. We ask all Australians to denounce the anti-Semitism and hatred we see today in our beautiful country and across the globe. We ask you to stand with us. The powerful words of these Holocaust survivors have resonated across Australia. And thank you to child survivor and community stalwart Nina Bassett AM for leading this initiative. Your courage and the courage and spirit of all of our survivors continues to inspire us. At this time, I'd like you to watch a short film about Chris Delmar.
I had Polish Jewish classmates in the co-educational college. One day they were there, the next day they had to leave for Poland. They had to flee, because they were ausgewiesen, they had to leave, deported, yeah.
In the morning of the night, the headmaster of a non-Jewish headmaster of a school who had to belong to the Nazi party, but he was a friend of my father. So he was a member of the Nazi party because if he wouldn't have been, he would have been thrown out of his job. Yeah. So this headmaster, a wonderful man, phoned my father and said, "Look, Eugen, take your son, because all Jewish boys and men over 16, I think, will be put into a concentration camp. So take your son and leave immediately." I think the phone call must have come at 2:00 in the morning. My father and I picked our little bags and we left the house. So my father and I walked along the streets of Berlin, and 3:00, 4:00, and suddenly we came across the Kurfürstendamm, one of the main elegant streets of Berlin, with many, many very elegant shops, quite a few of them Jewish. And there we saw as S-men smash the windows. We actually saw it, glass everywhere. And we walked with our little satchel here early in the morning. We passed the famous synagogue in the Fasanstraße in Berlin, near the Kurfürstendamm. And the synagogue was in flames when we passed. And we didn't know at the time that there was a Jewish caretaker in there who got burned to death. We were scared.
We saw the shops being looted. We saw people jeering and screaming and shouting, serve them right, the Jews. And I believe that the man, the shamus who looked after the shul, was burned inside the shul. At night, at 11 o'clock, two very hefty boxer-type SR people came to find out where my parents were. And they searched the house, they searched the cupboards, they searched the wardrobes under the beds. They forced me to telephone my aunt or relatives, just to find out if perhaps my parents would be there. So I rang up, and my aunt, who was the widow of a rabbi, answered the telephone, and I said, "Oh, don't you really know where they are? I'm so worried," and hang up. And the Gestapo said to me, or the SR said to me, "You cheeky brat, if you don't tell us where your parents are, we will take you along. Make sure that they'll stay home next time we're here."
Unprecedented outpouring of anti-Semitism raging on our streets, on our television screens, on social media, and in our universities. We are all concerned about the online upsurge of anti-Semitic messages, disinformation, and hate speech, which threatens the very cohesion that binds our democratic societies together. So it is most fortunate tonight that Karel Fracapane is our keynote speaker. In his role at UNESCO, Karel has worked tirelessly campaigning against racism, anti-Semitism, and violent extremism. He leads activities relating to genocide prevention and hate speech. Currently, Karel's work at UNESCO is focused on global citizenship issues, including post-Holocaust issues and addressing contemporary forms of anti-Semitism. UNESCO works with countries to develop programs that foster understanding of the causes and consequences of the Holocaust, how genocides happen, and to encourage a constructive engagement in today's societies. UNESCO provides guidance and tools to support textbook and curriculum revision and promote appropriate and relevant pedagogies. Prior to joining UNESCO, Karel served as a policy officer at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs and head of the Department of International Relations of the Shoah Memoriale in Paris. He was the first executive secretary of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, and in this capacity worked for the governments of the United States, Italy, Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. You have been very busy, Karel. We are delighted that you have travelled across the globe. He actually came from Nigeria to Paris and then from Copenhagen to Melbourne, and next week's Brazil, to deliver the 2023 Betty and Shmuel Rosenkranz Oration, and the topic is Combating Hate Speech in the Digital Age. It is my pleasure to welcome you to deliver tonight's address.
Dear Sue Hempel and Michael Dubinsky, co-presidents of the Melbourne Holocaust Museum, dear Jane Jotham, Chief Executive Officer, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight on behalf of the United Nations Organization for Education, Science and Culture. These are turbulent and frightening times, and I want from the outset to acknowledge the anguish and the feeling of loneliness that so many people feel as Jewish communities across the world are facing what may be an unprecedented wave of global anti-Semitism. On 7 October, the world awoke to the horror of Hamas terrorist attacks against entire communities in Israel. On that day, it was not the symbols of the Israeli nation or its army that were targeted. It was men, women, and children, random and peaceful citizens, young people partying, who were massacred. It was not an act of war. It was pure hatred of Jews on a scale and with a violence unseen since the Second World War and the Shoah. And it is, again, hatred of Jews that we now see in our streets. People threatened, insulted, attacked, Jewish representatives isolated, and the 7 October massacre already minimized, excused, if not already conveniently forgotten. I confess that I stand before you with a deep sense of uncertainty and sadness as we are witnessing a situation probably unique of its kind. Ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations Charter states our faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person. This is a simple but powerful and universal message. All human beings are born equal in dignity. This is the message of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948, as well as the Genocide Convention, adopted the same year under the shadow of the Holocaust. This message is at the core of UNESCO's mission, funded to build peace in the minds of women and men. And that is why I'm delighted to have the honor of speaking on this day of commemoration. As we just saw, the so-called Kristallnacht pogrom was a turning point in the state-sponsored persecution of the Jews in the territories of the German Reich. Thousands of shops were destroyed and looted, hundreds of synagogues torched, cemeteries desecrated, Jews beaten up and publicly humiliated, rapes and murders by SMN and rioters claiming probably hundreds of lives, suicides, imprisonment at a massive scale. More than 30,000 Jewish men were arrested by the SS and the Gestapo, leading to more violence in camps and in prisons and to hundreds of deaths. This was not enough. Jews were forced to pay for the damage inflicted on them and their property, preserving insurance companies from covering for the losses and leading thousands of people into bankruptcy. These were days of terror, and it was terror with a purpose. Kristallnacht was an opportunity to remove the Jewish population from social, economic, and cultural life through new legislation enacted in the aftermath of the pogrom and through forced immigration, eventually leading to a major refugee crisis. Kristallnacht was a first step towards tougher measures to come and a plain reflection of the intentions of the regime, which would eventually culminate in genocide in the context of the Second World War. Kristallnacht was a dramatic turning point for the Jews of Germany and a successful test for the Nazis. The passive reaction of the German population made it clear that a more radical policy could be implemented. The message was unequivocal. No one is going to stand for you. At a time when anti-Semitism, racism, hate speech, and disinformation spread like wildfire on digital platforms, at a time when efforts to reason and dialogue are covered up by the vociferations of those who want to divide our societies and destroy the rule of law, when conspiracy myths and casting doubt on scientific and historical truth take over from critical thinking, when in democracies, demagogy, populism, scapegoating become mainstream political discourse, this question becomes more relevant than ever. Will we be able to stand for the persecuted and the unwanted? If it comes to the worst, will we be able to stand for the values we treasure? I find it difficult to make analogies between present days and the Holocaust, and I'm not going to do so, but the past can indeed shed light on our present, explain it to a great degree, and in many ways it should illuminate our path to the future. A commemorative day like today is indeed an opportunity for us to reflect on the power of hate and its devastating consequences, on the dangers that lie ahead within ourselves and our societies, as well as on our individual and collective capacities to resist and to act to prevent the worst from happening again and again as it does. More so, in the face of such evil, and in the very troubled times we live in, we are invited to think about the values and the skills one should acquire to cultivate and engage actively, responsibly, courageously in the public sphere. At the end of the day, the important question remains, will I be able to engage and to stand for you? In hate speech, we see the reflections of polarization and intolerance that lie at the heart of so many of our current ills, with social media being utilized as global megaphones for hate. Dangerous speech has moved into the mainstream of our societies. This has far-reaching consequences. Hate speech pushes people further apart, laying the ground for stigmatization, discrimination, dehumanization. It's an extraordinarily efficient political tool, laying the ground for discriminations and calling on those who feel invisible and unheard, preying on fears and angst and resentment and ignorance. It does so to a point where violence becomes acceptable and even necessary. We know it too well. There is a direct link between incendiary rhetoric and attacks against foreigners and migrants, Jews, Muslims, LGBTQI, indigenous people, and other vulnerable groups. Group-targeted violence, terrorism, atrocity crimes happened because people were convinced that it was the right thing to do, not because they were forced to. Digital platforms bear a huge responsibility in that respect. The internet is shaping cultural norms, influencing political climates, and affecting human rights in unprecedented ways. Let me say this. The transformative role that digital platforms have played in advancing human rights is undeniable. By offering an open space for expression, they have amplified the voices of artists, activists, dissidents, and marginalized communities, allowing these groups to express their hopes and ideas, to share their stories and advocate for their rights, enabling societies to confront issues that once were rejected or ignored. Yet the same digital platforms that have democratized access to knowledge and culture to billions and fostered global connection have also become ecosystems of misinformation, disinformation, ideological polarization, and incitement to violence. The scale is breathtaking. In 2022, Twitter reported that it had found 1,600,000 pieces of content that violated its hate speech policy. The same year, Meta took action on 35.1 million pieces of content in violation of its hate speech policy. How many millions more have slipped through the net? These problems stem from a mix interconnected factors such as corporate decisions based on attention economics or lack of investment in content moderation systems. Too often, commercial interests override safety and human rights concerns. The result is an abundance of disinformation, conspiracy theories, and hate that is amplified by the platforms themselves. Tackling these challenges requires a collective effort from all. Researchers have a role in monitoring, educators in teaching critical thinking skills through media and information literacy, for instance, journalists in investigative reporting, and civil society organizations in campaigning for equality. Let me focus on 4 sets of solutions. First, transparency is key. We need a third way between state overregulation of content, which has led to disproportionate restrictions of human rights, and a laissez-faire approach that has failed to effectively protect those targeted with hate speech. Digital platforms must recognize they have an obligation to protect human rights and provide greater transparency about due diligence for their operations, such as in the context of elections or conflict. We all remember the role played by Facebook in facilitating incitement ahead of atrocities perpetrated against the Rohingya. We know how states can mobilize social media for destabilization purposes. 2 years ago, UNESCO, working with the United Nations and the World Jewish Congress, found that nearly half of all content related to the Holocaust on Telegram was anti-Semitic, 80% in the German language, nearly 1 in 5 on Twitter, 10% on Facebook. These figures are unacceptable. We therefore engage with Facebook and with TikTok to raise their awareness and to make sure that users confronted with content denying or distorting the Holocaust will be redirected towards a trusted source of information. And we created a website together with the World Jewish Congress for this purpose, aboutholocaust.org, which has now been accessed by more than 3 million people from 180 countries. Second, global coordination has become indispensable as too many countries around the world have embarked on regulatory processes as a solo solution, weakening deeply the civic space. This is why UNESCO has initiated last year a global conversation to safeguard freedom of expression and access to information while protecting vulnerable groups and preserving the public space from hate speech. Involving 134 countries, the Internet for Trust consultation is one of the largest consultations ever conducted by a UN agency, now leading to the development of global guidelines for regulating digital platforms. Third, we must address the implications of artificial intelligence. AI technologies are not neutral, but inherently biased due to the data on which they are trained. Therefore, machine learning can embed and exacerbate prejudice, potentially resulting in inequality and exclusion. UNESCO therefore adopted in November 2021 a recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, defining a set of universal ethical principles to govern the development of AI. This underpins UNESCO's recent cooperation with Meta and again the World Jewish Congress to harness the power of new technologies in support of Holocaust education. Through the project Tell Me Inge, launched 2 months ago during the United Nations General Assembly, an extended reality experience whereby young people can approach the history of the Holocaust through new lenses. Our aim is that technology serves collective and humanistic values. To counter hate speech in the digital age, it is essential to try to stop influential people from inciting violence with hate speech through better regulatory frameworks, through enhancing transparency and responsibility of digital platforms, and a more ethical use of AI, as I just exposed. But there is another dimension to these solutions. It is to make their audiences less susceptible to hate speech by inoculating them against it. In other words, through prevention. And it is my 4th point. Disarming drivers of hate, radicalization, information distortion, conspiracy theories all starts on the benches of schools. The United Nations Strategy and Plan of Action on Hate Speech, launched in 2019, calls for education to be leveraged as a tool for addressing and countering the upsurge in harmful discourses. Since then, UNESCO has been developing guidance for educators and is engaged in consultations and training with member states worldwide. Without facts, there is no truth. Without truth, there is no trust. Without trust, we have no shared reality, no democracy. These words spoken by Nobel laureate Maria Ressa underscore the importance of our organization's mission in that respect. We're not only defending the idea of the truth, we're also defending healthy democratic debate based on indisputable facts. It is our hope indeed, ensuring that the voices for change and truth are heard, fostering trust and the foundations of democratic debate based on those facts. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to come back to the challenge posed by anti-Semitism nowadays, because these principles I just exposed to combat hate speech in the digital age provide the backbone for UNESCO's work to address new forms of the oldest hatred. It has become so important this last month, more than ever. Anti-Semitism is a mirror of our democracy's well-being and a reflection of the regressive and dangerous tendencies that come to permeate our societies in times of uncertainty and angst. Anti-Semitism evolves with time and context. It adopts new masks, learning how to hide under different forms, sometimes finding shelter behind freedom of expression. It cultivates ideologies anchored in hate. Anti-Semitism feeds conspiracy theories and violent extremist messages from all sides of the political spectrum, both online and offline, regardless of the presence of a Jewish community. It is high time to understand that anti-Semitism does not concern Jews only. It threatens the realization of all people's human rights. A nation's level of humanity could invariably be judged by its behavior towards its Jewish population. It always began with the Jews, but never ended with them. This warning was delivered in 1975 at the United Nations General Assembly by then Israeli ambassador and future Prime Minister of Israel, Chaim Herzog. Anti-Semitism rarely comes as an isolated phenomenon and builds on public discourses stigmatizing minorities, refugees, foreigners, LGBTQI, women, and other groups. It builds on distortions of history and attempts to relativize and minimize the scope, the impact, and the complex realities of the Holocaust, accusing the victims for being responsible for their own fate, blurring local responsibilities in the perpetration of the crimes, accusing Jews of exploiting the history of the genocide for financial or political gain, or for the benefit of the State of Israel, equating the Holocaust to other events without any regard for the integrity of history or the sufferings of the victims, such as seen so many times during the COVID period. It also expresses itself, and it is very clear these days, in the form of demonization of Israel, seeking to delegitimize its very existence. Let me quote the philosopher Vladimir Yankelevich. He wrote with irony already in 1968, "Anti-Zionism is a godsend because it gives us permission and even the right and even the duty to be anti-Semitic in the name of democracy. Anti-Zionism is justified anti-Semitism, finally within everyone's reach. It is permission to be democratically anti-Semitic. What if the Jews were Nazis themselves? That would be wonderful. There would be no need to pity them. They would have earned their fate." This is today's reality. This calls for action. Political leadership at local, national, and global levels must name anti-Semitic violence under all its forms and speak clearly against it. It's not the case, not enough. We must also bolster the role of civil society to strengthen partnerships, reinforce dialogue, and ensure that anti-Semitism is dealt with as a concern for all, and not only as a problem of the Jewish communities. Should Jewish communities always bear the burden of preserving themselves? Jews cannot fight anti-Semitism alone, said Jonathan Sachs, former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. The victim cannot cure the crime. The hated cannot cure the hate. The only people who can successfully combat anti-Semitism are those active in the cultures that abhor it. At UNESCO, we believe that the prevention of anti-Semitism is both an immediate security imperative for Jewish communities worldwide and a long-term investment to promote human rights. We believe that education is paramount in that respect. Firstly, we must ensure that education systems build students' resilience to all types of prejudice and to anti-Semitism as a specific form of hatred. This must be recognized. Second, we must teach about anti-Semitism, its history, nature, various manifestations, to be able to recognize it. We must also teach about the history and cultures of the Jewish people to foster understanding and respect. And thirdly, we must respond effectively to anti-Semitism in educational settings, including in tertiary education. Too few countries are committed to this essential task. That is why UNESCO is stepping up its education programs around the world to combat the deadly ideologies that are grounded in anti-Semitism. We support first and foremost those in the front lines, teachers and educational staff. We're providing guidance to policymakers, teacher trainers, school principals, and educators so that they can better teach against anti-Semitism. We're active in the European Union, where UNESCO has launched capacity building programs with ministries of education of 12 EU countries in partnership with the European Commission. We're also working closely with the American Jewish Committee, the University of Southern California, and the American Federation of Teachers to train teachers and teacher trainers in the United States, thousands of them. Soon, we will release an online course on anti-Semitism to provide educators globally with more opportunities for training. But because education concerns everyone, UNESCO has also developed resources that are useful for all civil society. Last year, in partnership with the B'nai B'rith and the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, we published a report on online anti-Semitism for civil society professionals and especially for Jewish organizations, in fact. We're now working with the World Jewish Congress, the American Jewish Committee, and the B'nai B'rith to develop training workshops for European and North American civil society organizations who wish to build their capacities to better fight against anti-Semitism. We need new and innovative strategies to provide all people with knowledge about anti-Semitism and about Jewish culture and history, to help them grasp the mechanisms of scapegoating and to reject anti-Semitism, and also to enhance intercultural competencies and make the most of diversity. The same spirit underpins UNESCO's program to support Holocaust and genocide education worldwide, implemented in partnership with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum to stimulate new policies, new pedagogies in all continents, involving at the moment countries as diverse as Brazil, Cambodia, Colombia, Greece, Rwanda, India, Morocco. I was 2 weeks ago in Lagos, Nigeria, with the highest education authorities to develop a peace education curriculum based on Holocaust and genocide education. In countries struggling with a history of atrocity crimes and ethnic and religious conflicts, this education is more than relevant. We must make the most of the power of education for human rights and tolerance and for new forms of global solidarity, online and offline. I'm so pleased to be with you this week in Australia. It's a wonderful country, and we live comfortably in this part of the world. And I too was born and raised in a wealthy and safe continent where human rights are overall protected, where ideas and information flow freely, where no one dies of hunger, and where one should, in general, not fear the authorities. Sometimes, though, the veneer of our civilization, of our liberal, rational, and democratic systems, and the values that underpin them, crack brutally. I sometimes recall the voice which I heard on a police recording 10 years ago of the French killer, Mohamed Merah, a 23-year-old Al-Qaeda affiliate who assassinated four French soldiers and, armed with a machine gun and a GoPro camera, went into a Jewish school, grabbed a little girl by the hair, shot her in the head, point blank, and then went on and killed 2 other children and a teacher. Just a few hours before the police assault that eventually costed him his life, he said calmly and firmly to the negotiator, "I'm not afraid of dying. I love death as much as you love life. Moi, la mort, je l'aime comme vous aimez la vie." This so profound and unfathomable violence that lurks in dark corners of our minds and of our human societies, as comfortable as we may feel, is a reflection of the fact that we may constantly, without even being aware, be walking on the edge of a precipice. Killing small children for no other reason than they are Jewish, and by his own admission, out of pure hatred to avenge Palestinian children, he said. Wasn't this execution-style killing reminiscent of the gesture of the SS killing a child in a ghetto of occupied Poland? Of course, a few fanatics showed support for this monstrous attack, but it is much more worrying, so many in the public showed total indifference. Were they somehow thinking that those kids had brought death upon themselves? Why was it so difficult for part of the media and the leadership to say right from the outset what we all already knew? These children were chosen to be killed because they were Jewish. The anti-Semitic motive was so obvious, and yet it took hours, days before it was clearly stated. The killings didn't give rise to big demonstrations in the streets. Hadn't the children been Jewish, what would have been the reaction? I find this question absolutely frightening because I think I know the answer. And I know also how this resonates today. Did we actually wittingly chose to close our eyes to the fact that today in Europe, and we've seen it since then elsewhere, small Jewish children can once again be killed for no other reason than what they were born? Yes, the unthinkable is possible. Yes, at the hands of violent extremists or tyrants, but only because indifference and cowardice allow them to move their opponents forward. So perhaps walking uncertainly on the edge of this precipice is a fundamental characteristic of the human condition. And perhaps our work as educators, as politicians, as community leaders, is just to keep us on track, walking straight on this edge and prevent us from falling into the abyss of violence which, at moments, penetrates our universe to show its monstrous and yet so familiar face. Is there a more noble and important task than the work of this museum? Is there a more difficult work and nonetheless more indispensable one than pursuing your mission, Jane, in these challenging times? And can we go on and do our business as usual? No, I don't think so. I think we need education which shakes our certainties, our personal biases and beliefs, which questions the inner structures of the societies we live in, the injustices that may underpin its very foundation, which prompts us to question our relations to authority. We know, and this is perhaps a lesson to learn from the history of Europe and the Nazi Germany, that culture, knowledge, the love of the arts are not insurmountable bulwarks against hate, and certainly not against a mutating hate like anti-Semitism, which keeps coming in waves under different guises. I'm not saying in any way that we must call into question our belief in the ever-needed progress of humanity through the benefits of education and the rule of law based on the philosophy of human rights. I'm just saying that culture and education will serve this ideal purpose only if infused with a profound sense of the dignity of every human being and a sense of commitment and critical thinking. Mahatma Gandhi said, in true democracy, every man and woman is taught to think for himself or herself. Critical thinking is key. We need education that is more open to the world and to others. We need education that shows humankind's tremendous intellectual and moral resources, as well as the infinite and yet so rarely expressed capacities for compassion and solidarity in the worst imaginable circumstances. And dear friends, we need Holocaust museums, such as the remarkable institution hosting us tonight, capable of carrying this universal message, calling on those coming within its walls and beyond to embrace humanity. At the same time, ladies and gentlemen, we need Holocaust museums proudly rooted in the history of the Jewish people, standing high to preserve the values that have kept the Jewish people unified throughout centuries and ready to protect its well-being now and in the future. It remains essential today, especially today as the Middle East is being engulfed in a terrible war, claiming yet again so many lives, as Israel brutally woke up on 7 October facing an existential danger, casting a shadow on the future of the Jewish people. At this time of global turmoil, your work has never been so important. Fundamentally, this is about defending humanity as a single community, sharing values and equal dignity. This has been UNESCO's message for nearly 80 years, and I heartily thank you for giving me the opportunity to recall it today.
Thank you, Karel. Karel spoke about education as paramount to combating hate speech, violent extremism and anti-Semitism, and this is a key aspect of the work we do at the Melbourne Holocaust Museum. Our role has never been more important. In actual fact, tomorrow morning at 8 a.m, Karel is speaking to about 30 principals from state schools across Victoria, and he is going to be talking about what he's been discussing tonight, and I hope that they heed your words of wisdom and strive to inoculate their students against the hatred. As custodians of the truth, the Melbourne Holocaust Museum is committed to honouring the lives of our survivors and the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust. So thank you, Karel, for your oration tonight. Thank you very much. So for the last part of the evening, it is my pleasure to invite Karen Fellman, an accomplished Hebrew and Yiddish singer based in Melbourne, to the stage. She will sing Eli, Eli, followed by the partisan song and the Hatikva. Thank you, Karen.
Oh, I've got a lolly in my mouth still. Oh, that's okay. Sorry. Eli, Eli, שלא ייגמר לעולם. החול והים רישרוש של המים ברק השמיים תפילת האדם השמיים, ברק השמיים, תפילת האדם. Oh Lord, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of heavens, the praise of man, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, berak hashamayim, tfilat Adam. If you'd like to stand and join me for the partisan lead. Sag nicht kein Mal, als du gehst am letzten Weg, Gott Himmeln bleiene, verstellen bleie Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkter Schor, es wird erpäugt an unser Trott, mir seinen da. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkter Schor, es wird erpäugt an unser Trott, mir seinen da. Von grünem Palmenland bis weißem Land von Schnee. Wir kommen an mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und wo gefallen sie, so spritzt von unser Blut. Sprotzen wird dort unser Moore, unser Blut. Und wo gefallen sie, so spritzt von unser Blut. Sprotzen wird dort unser Gwore, unser Mut. Es wird die Morgensonne begierden uns dem Heind, und der Nächten wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Noch heut versammeln wird die Sonne in dem Kajor, wie a Parol so gehen das Lied von Dor zu Dor. Noch heut versammeln wird die Sonne in dem Kajor, wie a Parol so gehen das Lied von Dor zu Dor. Geschrieben ist das Lied mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Lied von a Vogel läuft er frei. Das hat der Volk zwischen fallen dicke Wand. Das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in die Hand. Das hat der Volk zwischen fallen dicke Wand. Das Lied gesungen mit Naganes in die Hand. To sag nicht kein Mal, als du gehst am letzten Weg, wenn Himmeln bleiene, verstellen bleie Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkter Schor, es wird erpäugt an unser Trott, wir seinen da. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkter Schor, es wird erpäugt an unser Trott, wir seinen da. Kolot balevav penima, nefesh Yehudi homiya. Vate Mizrach Kadima, Ayin Letzion Sophia. Od lo avda tikvatenu, hatikva bat shnat alpayim. להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו ארץ ציון ירושלים.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Karel, again for your excellent oration tonight. And thank you all for coming. Good night.